Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to USIP, to the U.S. Institute of Peace. My name is Manal Omar. I'm the Acting Vice President for the Middle East and Africa Center. I'm very happy to be here with you today, and very happy to welcome this very esteemed panel on a topic that's very dear to my heart, looking at religion and violent extremism and the very important role of gender in the mix as part of the solution. One of the things that I'm most proud about being at USIP is the fact that we actually have a very active center that does religion and peace building. And I say does religion and peace building because we try to move ourselves away from just the conversations of interfaith, but actually what is the role in solving some of the problems. Likewise, we have our Gender and Peace Building Center that really focuses at the role of gender as a potential solution for conflict resolution. Our recent partnership with the Carter Center, and I was very lucky to attend the Forum on Women over the last 2 days and interact with these very important people who are on the ground in the field and a much wider group of activists, over 60 people, really putting our heads together, recognizing that when we talk about women, when we talk about using religion as a very important tool to change, that we already have a concrete idea of what the recommendations are. One of the biggest challenges that we have been facing is a little bit of the missing piece of how do we take all these recommendations, like UN Resolution 1325, a lot of the ideas that have kind of emerged about women and religious actors and that combination being a missing piece in effectiveness in our programming. So we've got the rhetoric, which is, I think, an accomplishment we didn't have in the past, but we haven't really merged that in terms of bringing it together in practice and in change on the ground. We just keep repeating the recommendations, but over and over we're failing to initiate them, particularly in the times of conflict. So I was very pleased to be working with everyone to be talking about how do we change that, how do we move it forward. I think particularly when we look at religion, today we know that religion is a powerful tool, both negative and positive. And the temptation is to just keep that negative element of, let's sideline religious leaders or use them as a tool to counter narratives versus really partnerships. And I think that the last few days at the Forum on Women, we really kind of challenged ourselves to think about how we practice in a much deeper way. One of the other issues that we talked about at the Forum that I thought was very powerful was, in some ways, when we're talking about the injustices and the traction of religious extremism, taking a note that when we're talking about religious extremism, we're not automatically just jumping to assumption that it's only the Islamic State. We're seeing religious extremism coming out in countries like Burma. We're seeing there's an initial religious extremism that are being using within militias in Africa. But the reality is people have been able to take religious ideology and use it in a negative way, that there may be a temptation to forget about the positive ways in really working and dialoguing with religious leaders and integrating them in programs where we can have an effect. And we discussed different ways of doing that. Now, rather than me sit and continue to talk about my walkaways, I want to go ahead and welcome you again and transition over to this panel. I have had the great honor of working with Karin Ryan at the Elders Conference before and more recently at the Forum, so I'd like to welcome you, and I'm glad that you're here with us. She's the Senior Advisor for Human Rights at the Carter Center, and she will introduce the panelists and continue with the panel. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you so much, Manal, and to the U.S. Institute of Peace for hosting us. It's really a wonderful opportunity, and I see a very diverse audience, including all age groups, which makes me very happy because I think we have a lot of wisdom, learning, and also young people who are going to help us take this work forward. I'm going to just turn it over to Susan Hayward here from USIP, but before I do, you might have seen as you were sitting down the Forum on Women website that we have developed. It's in development. We have it unfolding in a few stages. The first stage will be a roundtable discussion where we will use virtual roundtables to keep the conversation going. So if you like what you hear today, keep coming back to the website. There will be events and there'll be virtual roundtables where we keep the conversations going from many countries. So we're really excited about that tool. Just to deliver a message from President Carter, who was the chair of this forum, we've been doing this for many, many years, working with human rights defenders. Because our view, and his view when he was in the White House, was that people can actually transform their societies from within. And our job is to think about how we can help them and not impose from the outside. That was his philosophy as president. And it's the philosophy that he brought to the Carter Center, whether it's eradicating disease or whether it's promoting democracy and human rights from within. Working with religious actors, one thing that we decided is we want to start using the term religious actors, because there might be leaders, there might be people of faith, there might be organizations, various ways to engage religion in the solutions. The last point I'll make from President Carter, and from the group at large is, if we could understand that so much of the funding and our political will goes towards military activities, towards violence, and we called this conference Beyond Violence. We understand that whenever there is a very dire threat to us that we see in the Middle East, and I'm not going to call it the Islamic State, and Mubin will maybe elucidate on why we should stop using that phrase later. But there are threats, and we have to face threats. We can't ignore threats, physical threats like this. But if we could devote some of our political will and our resources to the long term, to the vision on the horizon of what it is we're trying to accomplish, we are relying on tactics now. What we need is vision. And one of the things that President Carter said is, we're going to spend something like $1 trillion to update the outdated nuclear arsenal over the next 10 years. $1 trillion. And that's a weapon system that we hope never to use. Pray God we never use it. Imagine what we could do with $1 trillion if we were building communities and working with people who are in their communities building the future. So that's a question I'll leave it with as we hand it over to our panelists.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Susan Hayward. I'm the interim director of the Religion and Peace Building Center here at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And Karin didn't do some of the PR for their work, and so I'm going to do it for her. The website that you can go to visit is forumonwomen.cartercenter.org.
And no www, because there's a redirect problem, so just Forum on Women.
Okay. And once you get there, you can get their publication, Mobilizing Faith for Women. And you can also read a little bit about President Carter's most recent book, A Call to Action, Women, Religion, Violence, and Power, which is an intersection that, as Manal mentioned, we're also very interested in doing a lot of work on here at the Institute of Peace, through the Religion and Peace Building Center, through the Gender Center, and some of our other centers here at the Institute, really looking at how do issues of gender, of religion, the drivers of violent conflict and extremism intersect, and how can we strategically, as an outside organization in partnership with local communities, try to operate with sensitivity to those dynamics, and also work cross-sectorally, cross-communities, in ways that can mobilize some of those same dynamics to address some of the underlying drivers of violence, whether social, psychological, economic, or political. And a lot of the folks you're about to hear from are operating in those strategic, sensitive ways in their local contexts, and have come here to DC after this forum in Atlanta to share with folks here some of the insights of the discussions there, some of the stories of how they're operating effectively on the ground, and some of the lessons for all of us here in DC as policymakers and coming from organizations seeking to support actors on the ground, about how we can do that work most effectively, recognizing that sometimes there can be a little bit of baggage with American organizations or actors coming in and support these efforts. So how can we do that work strategically and safely for them, and in ways that are effective, recognizing who is already doing this work on the ground, with whom we can partner, who are often not seen, who are often invisible. So each of them are going to offer a presentation, and then afterwards we're going to open it up for question and answer and larger discussion. So if you have questions along the way, please jot them down, because we want this to be a broad discussion. And we're going to start, you have the long bios, right, with you. Oh, and also if you want to tweet, we do have some hashtags. The Forum on Women is the hashtag that was used as part of the Carter Center Forum last week, and you can continue that discussion by hashtagging that. Beyond Violence is another one. So I won't give you the long bios of each of our presenters, but you can turn to those if you want them. But let me just say shortly that our first speaker is Fatima, coming from Basra in Iraq, where she leads an organization that she founded in 2003 that has helped to support women's empowerment, women's rights, and women's participation in activities that are addressing some of the root drivers of violence there, including most recently some of the work to engage with militia in Iraq. So Fatima, please.
سعدتم جميعا.
Good afternoon.
فاطمة أنا جمعية الفردوس العراقية من جنوب العراق.
I am Fatima from Al-Firdaus Society. I am from the south of Iraq.
تقريبا عمر منظمتي 12 سنة نعمل في شؤون المرأة.
Approximately the age of my organization, about 12 years, I'm working in women issue.
برامج المرأة التي تتعلق بتعليمها القراءة والكتابة، دعم المشاريع الصغيرة، مناهضة العنف ضد المرأة.
How we can empower women, how we can involve her in education programs, how we can educate women and enable her to participate in the smaller projects.
الشيء الذي عملناه مؤخرا هو بعد الأحداث الأخيرة ودخول داعش إلى العراق.
The last work that we did recently and after ISIL's invasion Iraq,
بدأ العنف يهددنا في كل مكان.
violence started threatening us everywhere.
ففي المحافظات الجنوبية بعد فتوى المرجعية السيدة السيستاني بالجهاد.
For example, in the southern provinces, and especially after the fatwa of the marji'iyya, the religious reference in jihad,
فوجئنا خلال أسبوع من الفتوى أن الكل بدأ يحمل السلاح في كل مكان.
we have been surprised that after a week since the fatwa has been issued, that many people will start carrying weapons everywhere.
فكثير من الشباب بدأوا يتركون الجامعات والمدارس ويحملون السلاح.
Many young people who are in the universities, they start leaving their universities and joining the armed groups.
وظهرت شخصيات كثيرة التي تتمثل باسم زعماء الدين الذين يجمعون هؤلاء الشباب باسم الجهاد.
Many characters has been appeared and came to the surface that were gathering those young men and who carrying the names of jihad.
فكنت أنظر للجيران والأقارب والكل يحمل السلاح.
So I start looking around me that my neighbors, relative, everyone start carrying weapons.
ولدي 3 أولاد فكنت أخشى أن يحملون السلاح أيضا.
I am a mother of 3 children, actually 3 boys, and I was worried that maybe would be subject to carrying the weapons.
فلا بد أن أفكر بطريقة أن أمنع هؤلاء من حمل السلاح.
So there should be a way that I start thinking how to prevent them from carrying weapons.
فالجهاد ليس بالعنف وليس برفع السلاح.
So jihad is not about violence and not about raising weapons.
نحن خلقنا لدينا رسالة إنسانية نقوم بها وهي العمل.
We have been created for the humanitarian purpose, a humanitarian message, which is work.
فسمعت هنالك مقر يضم أكثر عدد ممكن من الميليشيا الشباب الذين تركوا المدارس وانضموا للميليشيا تقريبا 3000 شاب.
So I have been here. There's a big headquarters as training centers that contain the biggest group of the young people who joined the militia.
وأنتم تعرفون جميعا صعوبة الدخول إلى هذه المقرات العسكرية أو مقرات الميليشيا.
And you may do realize that there is a big difficulty to go there and visit these training centers.
ففكرت بطريقة أن أدخل إليهم وهي أنني جمعت تبرعات من الأصدقاء ومن التجار تقريبا ما يقارب $5000 لأشتري المواد الغذائية والملابس لهؤلاء.
So I found out a way to get into these training centers. This is why I asked some people to donate some money. So I was able to collect about $5,000 from people, and I was able to buy some nutrition, some clothes, and go to visit these training centers.
وعند اللقاء بهم فهمت أن هنالك أحاديث خاطئة يفهمونها بالدين وآيات للتطرف أنه الجهاد هو الموت وهو حمل السلاح.
So when I met those young people at the training center, I found that they are carrying just misleading and wrong understanding about carrying weapons, jihad, and about life and death.
ففكرت أنني أنا لست فقيهة في ديني لكنني كنت أحفظ الآيات الكثيرة من القرآن الكريم التي تحث على العمل وأننا خلقنا إلى العمل وأن لدينا رسالة ممكن أن نعمل عليها.
So I do realize that I am not a scholar in my religion, but I also well known about some verses in my religion that life is to live and to work and to make a good things.
وهؤلاء 3000 لم يكن لديهم تواصل بالإيميل أو فيسبوك أو أي تواصل إلكتروني غير الهاتف النقال.
Those 3,000 young people who were in the training centers, they were out of any contacts with emails or anything.
فتقريبا 500 من هؤلاء الشباب قدرت البعض أحصل على أرقامهم وصفحات الفيسبوك وتواصلت معهم بمبادرات السلام.
I were able only to get about 500 of those young men who were in the training centers about their phones, about their Facebook.
وبدأت أعطيهم مواعيد للخروج من المعسكر فنزور المدارس والمستشفيات ونزور دور المسنين ونقوم بمبادرات سلام.
So I started open channels with them through their official, through the social channels like the Facebook, phone, and then I asked them to go and visit some hospitals, some schools, in order to make some improvements in these places, like cleaning or doing the glasses of the windows.
بصراحة ما زال لدينا هنا استمرار بهذه المبادرات لكن هذه المبادرات تحتاج إلى دعم متواصل حتى ننقذ المجتمع من ما هو فيه.
Frankly speaking, this initiative is good and it's sustained till now, but we still need more support in order to make it more fruitful and productive in the future.
نحتاج الإعلام أن يسلط على هذا العمل ونتواصل معه.
For example, we need media coverage in order to publish this initiative and to make it reach everyone.
نريد أن نعمل لقاء مع هؤلاء جميعا الميليشيا من قبل رجال دين معتدلين حتى يحكون لهم أنهم خلقوا لتأدية عمل آخر إنساني وليس جهاد.
For example, we like to make interview with those young people by religious men so they can pursue them and convince them to put down the weapon and come back to the social life.
هنالك المبادرات الكثيرة الإنسانية لكنها تحتاج إلى عمل وإلى استمرار.
There are many humanitarian initiatives, but it needs always to be supported in order to sustain and develop.
بصراحة أنا جدا أفرح عندما أفتح صفحتي الفيسبوك وأجد هنالك عشرات من ضمن الشباب الميليشيا يطلبون صداقتي ويطلبون العمل معي.
Actually, I feel so happy when I opened my Facebook page. I found many militia men who are like to join me and like to talk to me, to join my Facebook page and to talk to me and to continue friendship with me.
هذا هو ملخص لا أريد أن أخذ وقت الآخر.
This is the summary of my presentation, and I don't like to take the time of others. Thank you.
لكم جميعا.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Fatima. Shukran jazeer. A couple things that I think are remarkable about her story. One is that obviously there is already work that's being done at the front lines of some of the most extreme violence that we're seeing around the world. And it's work that's being done not because of outside incentives, not because of outside strategies that are being offered, expert advice and strategies or funding, but she managed to find the funding herself and to develop the strategies herself to do this work because she knew what the problems were and how to address it. But also that important recommendation about the need to create linkages and to help connect her with media outlets and others to really amplify those efforts. Our second speaker comes to us from Libya, Dr. Alaa Murabit, who is the leader of the organization called the Voice of Libyan Women. She grew up in Canada until the age of 15 and then moved to Libya where she helped found this organization to advance women's rights as well as the women's role in the reform taking place there, the transition, and in peace work being done there. So you can read her long bio, but Alaa, I'll hand it off to you.
You really don't have to read that whole bio. So first off, thank you all for coming and thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here and to not only share our experiences with you, but hopefully learn from some of the lessons you guys have as well. I founded the organization called the Voice of Libyan Women after the work we did throughout the revolution. And the organization initially focused on utilizing international conventions, and because, let's be fair, I founded the organization quite young. I was 21. I have no idea what a women's rights organization would do to reach the vision I wanted. So I went on to Google, and they told me political and economic empowerment through international conventions. And I was like, done, I can do this. This is what we're focusing on now. Did not work the way I thought it would, because I did not necessarily consider my local context. And very early on, I would go to my community, my aunts and uncles even, and I'd be like, international conventions. And they'd be like, Habibti, which is a very nice way of saying like sweetheart. We don't follow local law for 42 years, and you're asking me to follow international law? Like, let's be a bit realistic. So I started initially through our own community, through my organization, in our own families, and then in our city, and then slowly spreading it out, seeing what exactly would work. What belief system could I tap into that people could say, I recognize your right for dignity and respect, and you recognize mine. And very quickly it became apparent that people are heavily regulated by culture. And culture is heavily influenced and sometimes excused by misinterpreted, misused, and manipulated religion. And for us, it became apparent that the only way to address this was by saying, wait, we're not going to step out of the religious arena, because for decades, that's what women in the region have done. A lot have chosen not to actively contest the misuse of religion. They don't want, and for fair reasons, they don't want their reputation to come under fire. It's a very difficult arena to get into. But what happens is the conversation will happen with or without us. And the conversation will determine what happens to our rights and our bodies and our dignity. And so we felt that it was imperative that we become part of that conversation. Our first project was International Purple Hijab Day, which happens February 13th of every year. And it is a day where men get to wear purple ties or scarves around their neck, and women can wear purple scarves or ties or even a purple pin or ribbon. And it's a day against domestic violence. There is no learning curve. We don't go and give seminars. It's genuinely just a day where people show awareness for action against domestic violence. And the reason we did something that only asked for you to put a color on was because we wanted to see how many people would initially buy in. Could this technique work? In the first year, we had 17,000 Libyans. 17,000, including the Libyan Prime Minister on TV publicly state that domestic violence was against our belief system. The second year, we had Queen Noor of Jordan, among other international elite, as well as now 35 cities in Libya do it through their public school system. We quickly realized that this was a way where we could address social issues, where people felt comfortable, people felt that their belief system was being recognized, and we could actually make significant change. Our Justice Minister that year spoke out for reparations for rape victims. We then went on to a national security assessment, and that national security assessment became one of the foundations for our women's charter work, and now will be fed into the Libyan constitution. And during that national security assessment, we asked women, what is their definition of security? And a woman said, to be honest, I don't know what security is. I'll tell you what insecurity is. Insecurity is every single time my son leaves the house, I feel like I am in the passenger seat of a car. And the car, if you've ever driven in Libya, we drive fast, we don't wear seatbelts, and everybody, it's a life philosophy we have. Everyone is the best. So she said that it's like she's sitting in the passenger seat praying and holding on to the door, and her son is driving. And her son is sure of where he's going. It's his foot on the pedal. He's the one who gets to leave the house with the weapons. He's sure he's coming home safe. He has that confidence of the driver. But she sits in the passenger seat praying to God. She said, that's how I feel every day waking up, when my kids go to school, when my son leaves the house, when I hear bombs nearby. So we very quickly after that said, okay, so how can we address women's role in security? How can we do this? In a society where a lot of men can't even be involved in security if you don't have a gun, how can we ensure that women have a voice and it's heard? And we started something called the Noor campaign. And Noor in Arabic is basically a symbolic word for enlightenment. And the idea is that darkness is not a place of ignorance. Darkness is just the absence of light. So when people say, well, darkness, it's so sad, people don't know, it's actually it's a great opportunity. All you have to do is shed light on the issue. So the Noor campaign took Quranic verses and hadiths, which are sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and put them on billboards initially. And in the radio, traditional media is very rarely talked about, but it's very significant in our society. So radio, billboards, television. For 3 months, we did an only media campaign. Our organization did not show up. The name, The Voice of Libyan Women, was not heard. And we did it specifically to send the message that this was a community effort, that this was for community rights. This is not about women. Men are not perpetrators. This is simply about the betterment of community. Following that, we went into schools, workplaces, mosques, with a 35-city local team structure. So I did not go into another community. Members of that community, business people, civil society, people from the Girl Guides, young men, our teams were actually predominantly youth men in some cities, were the ones who would go into schools and into workplaces. And they carried this message of equal rights. And so after this 6-month campaign, and when we were involved in schools and such, it became the largest campaign ever conducted in Libya by civil society or government. And we were able to actually get statistics in our surveys, which we then filtered to the government. the governments, I apologize. And over the course of that time, we realized that communities were much more open to hearing about their belief system and how their belief system actually established the international conventions, how the UN kind of copied us, because we came up with, free speech and human rights and dignity first, right? So it became a much easier way for us to work, and that's how we've carried on our work and how we've ensured that women have places at the peace table. It's not a foolproof structure. It needs support. It needs buy-in. It needs partners, right? Because these conflicts aren't created only locally. These are not community conflicts. They're heavily influenced by regional politics and by international actors. And so they need all those different groups to reach solutions. But they are a start in understanding that the quickest way to change the community and the most sustainable and practical is through the people who have access to that community and who have local respect in that community. They are the agents of change we need to be working on. And if we continue to solely bomb schools and bomb hospitals and create this feeling of persecution in the local community, we're only going to get more young men who want to pick up guns and some young girls. So the idea is we really do need to start changing the way we're communicating with local communities and who we're communicating with. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alaa. I studied theology and religion before I went to international relations school, and when I first went to IR school and learned about humanitarian law and human rights law, I sort of looked around the room at everybody else and I was like, does anybody realize that they're talking about Hugo Grotius and that they're talking about a lot of the laws and the ideas that have their roots within religious law and within religious philosophical language that has since become secularized, but understanding some of the roots of these ideas within religious teachings can go a long way in terms of making them feel more resonant and relevant to local communities. You want to read the long bio of the next speaker, Mubin Shaikh, because he's got an interesting one. He speaks very authoritatively, having spent some time within Al-Qaeda-affiliated organizations, having been radicalized when he was younger, and then through a series of experiences, started to question his commitments and his understanding of Islam, and now works quite a bit with actors on the ground and with the Canadian and other governments to support efforts to address counterterrorism and counterviolent extremism. So Mubin?
Thank you very much. My Twitter handle was @CaliphateCop. Both C's are uppercase. It really is a great, great honor to be at U.S. Institute of Peace. I thank all of you for coming. I'm really honored and humbled to be in the company of people, women especially, who are doing really, really good work. People always tell me, you're so brave. You did this, you did that, and I think back to the Women Peacemakers Conference that we had at San Diego University, and it was stories that are happening in villages that we don't hear about. We're so far removed from them, and that's where the real, I think, work is being done. So I'm going to try to do some of that, explain some of what I do, and hopefully piggyback off of them. So Susan mentioned a little bit about my background. 20 years ago, I would have ended up in an Al-Qaeda cell. I probably would have either ended up killing myself, killing people. I went to Pakistan. I was 19. I was actually 18. Went to Pakistan. I had a chance encounter with the Taliban. And a young kid from the West, from Canada, identity crisis, sense of adventure, sense of belonging, wanting to realize the idealized and romanticized versions of Islamic history where we all lived happily ever after. And here I am, and I come upon about 10 individuals armed to the teeth, turbans, beards, robes, machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades. And they said to me that I was with a group that was an apolitical missionary-type group, and the call was that if you want to bring about change in the world, you do so by following the commandments of God and as shown by the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. And they said, yeah, we're doing that. and the way to bring about change is with this, and he held aloft his AK-47. And so for a kid like me at that time, I was just enamored by them. And when I returned back to Canada in 1995, the fall of 95, they came to power in Afghanistan. I took that as a validation of their worldview. And I became a supporter of the Taliban. And in 1996, the Chechen War began, a Grozny invasion in Chechnya, and I supported the Mujahideen in Chechnya. And then 1998, Osama bin Laden came out with his fatwa against the world. I became a supporter of Al-Qaeda. And I recruited other youth, and we were always on the verge of doing something. And I thank Allah, I thank God that He withheld that, He kept me back from that. And there were individuals that I grew up with who did go and never returned. And so I maintained that until the 9/11 attacks. I initially celebrated the attacks earlier in the day, and as the day went on, the tragedy of that day, not just on the people in the buildings themselves, but what came from that, the complete seismic shift that the world underwent after those attacks. And I started to reconsider my commitment to the cause. I then went to Syria. I realized I need to study my religion properly. So I traveled to Syria. I moved there for 2 years to study Arabic and Islamic studies. And by the grace of God, I found myself in the company of a very, very lovely sheikh who taught me the correct interpretations of the religion, and I left my extremist interpretations. And I always say that religion is like a hammer. You can either build a home with it or you can destroy a home with it. It depends on your perspective. So I returned back to Canada in 2004. Actually, I should say, while I was there in 2003, the Mike's Place bombing that happened in Tel Aviv, I knew those two individuals. I had chatted with them in the halls of the Faculty of Literature, University of Damascus, while we were there studying English, studying Arabic. And so a lot of pressure from the government came, and so I ended up leaving. Came back to Canada in 2004, became an undercover counterterrorism operative. People always ask, wait, how does that happen? When I was growing up, and by day I went to public school, by evening I was going to Quran school, so open multicultural society versus closed, rigid, fundamentalist society. One of the kids from my Quran school was on the front page of the paper. He had been arrested on terrorism charges in connection with the London fertilizer bomb plot. I contacted the intelligence agency. Yes, I picked up the phone and I called them. And who does that? A kid who's just gone through 2 years of Syria, disillusionment, newfound appreciation for rights in the West, and became an undercover counterterrorism operative. I conducted infiltration operations into terrorist groups, individuals, and it's a long story, which I actually document in a book, Shameless Self-Promotion. This is my book. It's not really to, sell the book. It's to explain what everyone keeps asking. How does somebody go from point A to point B? How does a white kid from suburbia end up in Syria? How does a 15-year-old girl end up in Iraq and or Syria because she wants to marry her jihadi prince that she's been idolizing online? Probably because she's living in a very closed family home. She can't leave. You're not allowed to talk to members of the opposite sex. You want to tell teenage kids to do the navel gaze in this day and age? That's not going to work. It's not going to help. So there is this, it really does tie into a lot of the environment in which women and girls are growing up, boys are growing up. Is it any wonder that these boys have such a dysfunctional relationship with women that when they talk about sex, it's about sex with virgins in paradise after you kill yourself? It's like sexual nihilism. And so this is all linked. This is all linked to frameworks in which individuals are growing up. And so, the operational side apart, I began interacting with ISIS extremists online for 2 years, especially since the Syrian war began. One of our colleagues was talking about, the comment was made about when ISIS and these guys talk about we're breaking the women out of the prisons in Syria. And I followed 3 years of UN reports on the sexual assault of children and women and girls in Assad regime prisons. 3 years of hard copy reports that were done, but nothing was done about them. So these narratives, they all tie in. These are grievances that people are able to latch onto, even groups like ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria. They can see this. When there was the first British suicide bomber in Syria, they put metal armor onto a truck and they made it into a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, a truck bomb. And he attacked the Aleppo prison. And he was praised for it across the board. There was huge mainstream support for what he did, mainstream support, because it was a military target, it was a prison target, it was a civilian target, it was just him. He was going to do the right thing. So in my engagement with extremist individuals, whether they're Al-Qaeda associated, Al-Shabaab, there are some individuals that I've been able to pull away through private conversations, through the deployment, military term, to the deployment of counter narratives. So basically, I'm just going to wrap up because I don't also want to take time from our colleagues. The takeaway is that it is not about an either-or position. It's not that you have to rah for war, or you got to be all kumbaya and no war. There is a middle road. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, we are of the middle road. We take the middle road. It's a measured intellectual response to say very simply. And I'm coming from the counterterrorism perspective. I just came back from a course with NATO, counterterrorism operational planning. I'm going back again in a week. It's such a big problem. It's in Turkey. And everyone will tell you, you cannot kill your way out of this problem. You cannot do it. No, you talk to the most decorated special forces people and all of them, they'll all tell you, you cannot kill yourself out of this problem. How many airstrikes have been launched against ISIS? Wow, look at all these airstrikes. Here are the videos. Doesn't that look cool? Things are being blown up. Great. ISIS is still expanding. Clearly, we're doing something wrong. So when people press you to say, well, what, do you want to just leave ISIS to do what they want? I said, no, you don't. You do want to defeat and destroy ISIS, if that's the catchphrase that you're using these days. Yeah, you want to do all that. So actually do that. When you're doing this, it's actually causing them to increase. So clearly that's not working. That is not a tactic you want to be endorsing and furthering. So that's the takeaway, number one, that take the balanced position. That it's not about this and that. It's about figuring out what is your end game, what is your long-term vision. After you blow the crap out of this country or the other country and there's rubble and smoldering ruins left, then what? You're just going to get up and walk away? Look what happened in Libya. It will just reset the cycle. You establish a grievance, people will latch onto that grievance, they bring in ideology into that, you have a whole new generation of radicalized individuals. You cannot kill them all. You can't. As much as some people would like to think, you just cannot do that. So just my final point is that I strongly encourage you that if there is going to be, especially this authorization for a military force, that you do, and Sanam will talk about this, that you do promote the inclusion of women's security and the awareness that this is what happens at the end of the day. You can drop the bomb from thousands of feet above, but it's the mothers, the daughters, the fathers, the brothers, they're the ones who have to deal with what's left on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mubin. That's very powerful. And one of the things that I hope we talk about a little bit more in the question and answer as well is what are some of the root drivers of the violent conflict and extremism that can't be transformed or engaged or reached by bombs, but needs to be engaged through other means, and how can we support some of those efforts? So our last speaker today is Sanam Anderlini, who's well known in this town in the field of women's rights and women's peace building. She leads the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN, that has done a lot of work to draw attention to the work that women are already doing on peace building on the ground around the world, and also to try to draw more women into positions of decision making and policy making when it comes to these issues. So Sanam.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So at ICANN, we have a network of women activists, women's organizations in 13 countries across Middle East, North Africa, and Asia, and we're actually extending onto Nigeria and the Caucasus, basically anywhere where we're seeing the issues of extremism and militarism rising, and where we know that women are really at the front lines of this work. And there is a reason why we do this. And there's a reason why in the 20 years that you were going radical in your direction, I was going radical in my direction. It's because of what I've seen and what we know consistently. So on the one hand, we have the knowledge that women have on the ground, what Fatima has, or what Fatima talked about, what Alaa talked about, what our colleagues from Nigeria have talked about, and I hope they get a chance also to speak. They're seeing it, they're living with it, they're having to react to it, because when you get bombs or you get crisis, you don't have a choice. You have to stand up and look after your family and take action, and that's just a reality. So we've been seeing this in a number of places, and one of the things that we do is we now produce these briefs called What the Women Say. It's gendered, political, and security briefs. And I particularly raise this one to you. This is from Iraq. We published it in winter of 2013, and on the front page, we quote Al-Bahadly saying, "We're coming back to get you." Okay, so this is from women on the ground who were telling us, we're seeing the extremists coming. I can give you Libya, same story. We've just published Turkey. You know, it tells you what's going on the ground from the standpoint of women's experiences, and it is early warning, and so we need to take that seriously. The other reason for me is this issue of women leading by example. If we're looking for leaders to deal with these problems, these people are on the ground. They're not sitting in Washington. In fact, it's kind of depressing to talk to people here because they have so much power, but they're like, well, we can't really, because then it looks as if we're being weak. You know, guys, seriously, can we just have some courage behind our convictions and do the right thing for once? And then the other aspect of this, which in this town is really misunderstood and trivialized, is that women in these contexts have power and influence. There is a reason why Alaa and many other Libyans and Fatima and many of other women on the ground are being targeted and threatened with death for what they're doing and what they're saying. It's because they have influence, because they can change the way things are going, right? So instead of us here recognizing that, we trivialize it and say, oh, the women are doing women's issues. Let's give them micro credit and let's do women's empowerment. These people are more empowered than any of us will ever be, and more courageous than certainly I am and probably most of this room is. And the other side understands this, so either they're trying to kill them, or what they're doing is they're actually actively recruiting women. In Tunisia right now, I was talking to a colleague, in public bath, hammams and places where women frequent, they are being recruited into that ideology because women have influence. So we have to recognize that that this power, and recognize it as power, and put them at the table in terms of power play. The other aspect of this is that we have an exit strategy. When things go bad, the international community can pack up its bags and rush out of Libya or Iraq or wherever. Alaa can't do that. Fatima can't do that. So the issue of supporting and enabling the building of institutions on the ground is critical, because they are left to deal with the messes that we have often created and made worse for them on the ground. So, and I've worked on the Resolution 1325. I was involved in getting it mobilizing and drafting it. And the essence of that resolution is precisely this, that if you listen to women, they will tell you in their context how to do things. They will tell you that you can't just parachute in and talk about this framework. It's how do you put it at that level. It's really about putting them at the table for them to navigate the spaces and the strategies of how to do this work. But we're also seeing that their stories are being erased. And if we have time, I'll give you a little quiz on that, just to prove my point. But we're erasing them, we're ignoring them, and we're marginalizing them. And the net effect of all this, frankly, and I'm sorry for using an analogy that for some people may be a little bit odd, but Dr. Seuss, how many of you are familiar with Dr. Seuss and Cat in the Hat? Yeah. Okay, so the U.S. has taken a cat-in-the-hat approach to foreign and security policy. We go in to supposedly clean up one mess, and we keep creating a bigger and bigger and bigger mess, and then getting out, and then the cat-in-the-hat coming back. We're back in Congress thinking about authorizing yet another bill for war. It's absurd, and it's dangerous, and yet that's the approach that we're taking. The fact that we are looking at countries like Libya, Iraq, Nigeria, where they have enormous wealth, right? Nigeria should be a middle-income country. It's got so much wealth, and yet We have supported and enabled the corruption that's gone on. We're supporting and enabling militaries that are corrupt and leaders that are corrupt, and keep bringing those same guys back to the table and supporting them, as opposed to the voices on the ground. So we have a real problem in terms of how this town and our international community is dealing with these issues. The other side of the problem is that we have ceded the human rights agenda, and by human rights, I mean dignity, I mean shelter, education, health, basically. These things, for 30 years, we have given up those issues and pursued our own agenda of economic growth and so forth. And guess who's filled that void? It's these types of groups. I've interviewed gang members in Jamaica, and they will tell you the same thing as what you'll hear from these folks. People want basic dignity, and if you don't give it to them, somebody else will go and provide that. And the problem is that those other groups are often extreme in their ideology or militaristic in what they're doing. And we're seeing in the Muslim majority context, especially, what we've seen is the Wahhabi version of Islam, which is really not the Islam that I grew up with and was not the norm in Egypt and many of these places, has basically been spread by the Saudis, and it's now becoming normalized. We produced a brief called Extremism in the Mainstream. Before you even get to violence, you're getting extremist ideology, which is saying it's okay to treat other people that are not of the faith badly. And Pakistan, this is becoming normalized, and it's very, very dangerous. So we've ceded that space as well. So where are we? I think, and I really mean this seriously, this cannot go on. As Mubin was telling us earlier today, 9/11, Al-Qaeda had 5,000 members. Now how many people are in these, Boko Harams and ISIS and Al-Shabaab? And they're all the same. They all have the same sort of ideology and the same motivations and the same kind of system in place. It's getting out of hand, and we need to do something serious about it. Now, in terms of the work that's going on here, the recognition of the local voices, as I said, the people who are leading by example, needs to be elevated to the maximum level in our communities. Wherever you're working on these things, please bring that up and bring those voices out. The Women, Peace and Security Act is a piece of legislation that's now sitting in Congress, which actually addresses this. It talks about the participation of women having a gendered lens on foreign policy and security issues, which could have a major impact if it gets passed. So if you have congressmen, please get them to support it. If we're taxpayers in this city, we're responsible. We're actually responsible for what our Senate and our Congress is doing today. So we really need to speak out, because it's on our watch that this is happening. It's with our tax dollars that this is happening. And I'll end with a second Dr. Seuss quote, example, because I think he's one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, if you read his books, is Green Eggs and Ham. Green Eggs and Ham is a story of a guy who keeps going up and saying, will you try green eggs and ham? And it's like, no, I'm not going to do it here. And finally, he tries it. And it's like, hey, look, this works. And this is the message that we have. How much longer do we have to keep saying, listen to the local voices, bring women to the table, bring Afghan women, bring Libyan women, bring the civil society? How much longer do we have to keep saying this before it's done? It's become so critical, and it's just time for that to happen. So bear that in mind, and let's have the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanam, and other speakers. We're going to open it up for question and answer. We have 2 microphones on each side, so you can begin to line up. Or are we going to line up? Nope, we're going to walk around. So you can lift your hand and let our microphone handlers know if you're interested. I'm going to start with moderator's prerogative and just ask 2 quick questions of Fatima, Alaa, and Mubin. And that is, one, can you identify for us what do you see as one or 2 prime drivers, underlying root causes of violent conflict and violent extremism in your context? And 2, what is one of the main recommendations that you would offer to those of us here in DC about how to support your efforts most effectively on the ground?
I've been given permission by Alaa to speak.
Who's learning?
We asked Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, this. Somebody at the table said, "Sir, how do you do it? How do you have such ability to keep going?" And truly, after he thanked Karin for the work she did, he says, "I don't argue with my wife." It's like long life. Everybody asks us about drivers. I'm doing my PhD in psychology, studying radicalization and violent extremism. And radicalization is a very individualized process. You really can't say it's one thing or the other. Very generally speaking, grievances and ideology are the two key ingredients. It could be adventure, sense of belonging, sense of identity. It could be some of those things, all of those things. Things acting together in different intensity. It really depends on what background a person is coming from. You know, some secular guy who's got nothing to do with ideology and errant drone strike, and his family is dead. The next day, he's going to want to find where the Western armies are. He's going to want to attack them. There's no ideology involved. You might have a person who grows up marginally Muslim, doesn't really know about the religion, grew up, meets some peers in high school, this and that. They're talking about religion. They make him feel, you know, low self-esteem. How come you don't know enough about your religion? He's got a sense of, he feels the need to belong. He becomes radicalized. He goes through a period. So just a side note, radicalization is a process by which a person becomes extremist. And an extremist is someone who accepts the use of violence to achieve their goals, political goals especially. When you act on that violence, that's a violent extremist. It's synonymous with terrorist. So there are very many, different ways in which this can happen. It can be ideology and where it is. For example, if you grow up in a home and you're learning about religion, religion is the framework through which you view the world. And so your actions will thusly be informed. So even your sense of identity, who am I, what am I supposed to be, what am I entitled to, these are things that you might take from your ideology. So sometimes ideology is a driver. I know some people are shy to say this or reluctant to say this, but that's the reality. So that's a little bit about the drivers. How to support, it depends on where the person fits on that spectrum. I deal mostly with ideology-based extremism. So really, I would say number one, do not support the narrative that this is a war against Islam. I didn't say this in my comments about ISIS. Don't use IS. Please do not use IS. Do not call them Islamic State. Whether you want to believe it or not, doesn't matter. But as soon as the headlines read, United States bombs the Islamic State, they pick it up and they say, see, it's a war in Islam. They're bombing Islam, see? Even Daesh, I'm gonna give the same word I gave in the previous thing. Please write this down. Khawarij. 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 Yeah, takfiri is another term that was used in, takfiri is like, it's an adjective, it means somebody who does takfir, basically declares you an apostate. You're not Muslim enough, and on the basis of that, they kill people. That's the adjective, but the noun is Khawarij. Khawarij are a deviant sect the Islamic sources talk about the Khawarij. The Prophet alayhi salam, peace be upon him, he condemned them, he castigated them, he denigrated them. And I probably guarantee you, if the West starts using the term Khawarij, some extremist somewhere is going to hear that, and his head's going to explode. That's one less extremist to deal with, right? So.
بالنسبة إلى العراق وجود هذا التطرف بالعراق جاء نتيجة 3 أسباب.
According to Iraq, this extremism came to Iraq for the following reasons.
بعد سقوط النظام وجدنا انهيار لمؤسسات الدولة وبدأت هذه تشكل على أساس مصالح حزبية وفئوية.
After the old regime toppled and the collapse of the government institution, we found a kind of gathering according to the party belonging.
وحتى الحكومة التي شكلت في العراق هي على أساس طائفي.
Even the formation of the Iraqi government has been constituted according to the sectarian affiliation.
وكانما هي كانت عملية فوز بالنسبة للحكومة من الذي يفوز الشيعة أو السنة.
As it was a game of winning, who is going to win in this government, Shia or Sunni.
وكان لدول الجوار تأثير جدا كبير على هذا الموضوع.
The neighboring countries, it has a big influence upon this topic.
فكان هنالك من يدعم المذهب السني وهنالك من يدعم المذهب الشيعي.
Some of the neighboring countries were supporting the Sunni side and others supporting the Shia side.
كل هذه الأسباب وجدوا الشباب الكثير من الشباب هنالك أنهم يعيشون بفراغ ولمن يثقون وبمن ينتمون.
All these reasons, and because the young people, they were living in a kind of emptiness, they have no specific affiliation to anyone, and another reason is they make them join either a group, the Shia or Sunni.
فهم يقضون الدراسة لكن لا يحصلون على تعيين.
For example, they finish their education and they got no job or work.
أو يجدون أن المؤسسات تنهار أمامهم ولا يعملون شيء.
Or they are witnessing the collapsing of the government institution and they can't do anything.
فإنهم لابد أن يجدوا شخصيتهم في انتماءات معينة.
So they are start looking for specific personality or direction in order to have a specific affiliation towards them.
فعندما أنا أنشر صورتي بالفيسبوك أنا مجاهدة وأحمل السلاح وأنني سوف أقتل كم شخص بمعنى أنا أصبحت بطل من الأبطال.
So for example, if I publish my picture on my Facebook page, it means that I am a hero and I can carry weapon and I kill some people, so people will start to join me.
فمثل ما هذه الأفكار التي بدأت تؤثر بالشباب هي الحل موجود إنه نختار أفكار ومبادرات سلام تؤثر فيهم مثل ما داعش اختار الدين أيضا نختار الدين فيه مبادرات سلام.
So just like these stories and issues start influence young people and bring them to adopt specific stream, we can, like religion, we can also use another system that make those young people follow us.
فمثال أعطيكم كمثال على هذا الموضوع.
For example,
داعش دخل الموصل فبدأ يقتل المسيحيين واليزديين لأن يريد فقط دولة وجود دولة إسلامية كما تسمى.
After the ISIS invasion to Mosul, they start killing the Christians as they proclaiming that we are going to build an Islamic state.
وهذا يؤثر جميعا على المجتمع المسلم في العراق أنه ربما فعلا الإسلام هو له الوجود الثابت.
So of course it has a big influence on the society. It means that it's true. It's the Islam who deserve to be the existence religion.
فكنت أنا أنشر بعض الآيات القرآنية كمثال لو شاء الله لجعلكم أمة واحدة. الله يقول أنا أشاء أجعلكم أمة واحدة لكن جعلتكم مختلفين.
So I published something on my something like a verse from the Quran said if God wants he can turn you one nation.
وآية تقول إنا خلقناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا أن بعضكم عند الله أتقاكم بمعنى أنا خلقتكم مختلفين حتى تتعارفون بألسنتكم وألوانكم أنا جعلتكم هذا.
Another version from the Quran says that God created you from different tribes, different colors, different species in order to get exposed and to develop your life.
هنالك آية تقول لا فرق بين أعجمي وعربي إلا بالتقوى بمعنى لا فرق بين الأجنبي والعربي إلا بالعمل الصالح.
There is another verse saying there is no difference between who is Arabic or who is foreign unless his faith to God. So it means there is no difference.
وجدت تعليقات كثيرة أنها مؤيدة لما أقول.
So I found many comments supporting my opinion.
نحن نحتاج بصراحة معرفة أكثر واختلاط أكثر وفهم أكثر حتى نؤثر بهذا المجتمع.
We do need to get knowledge, to get knowledge and socialize with others in order to know the culture of each one.
داعش يستخدم الفكر نستخدم الفكر أيضا.
ISIS use the ideology. We have to use the same thing, also ideology.
وهذا هو الحل الأمثل.
This is the optimal solution. Thank you.
Yes.
So I agree with both Munib and Fatima about kind of the radicalization of individuals and how it comes about. I think that the question of how we radicalize individuals isn't the one we should be asking. I think is how we create societies where these groups continue to flourish and continue to attract people as a viable alternative. And I think it does come down to a lack of economic and political actualization for these individuals, which then plays on their personal need, be it for retribution or for a sense of belonging or a sense of fulfillment. But there is something in the society which allows these people to believe that this is the only way they will succeed. This is the only way they will provide for their families. This is their only option. And that means that there is something fundamentally wrong with our societies, that our societies are corrupt politically and they're corrupt economically, because those same individuals should have just as much opportunity and access to farm as they do to join a militia, right? I think that ideology plays a significant part in the sense that it is manipulated. And I think a good example of that, for me at least, is if you look at the United States, the debate on reproductive rights of women is as much a byproduct of ideological manipulation and conversation as is women not driving in Saudi Arabia. The only difference is it's not allowed to really influence as much individual uprising here because there are political and economic constraints, because people have something they will lose, right? So we have to create a society where people feel like they have something to lose by going an alternative and more violent route. Going back to what the US can do, I think, is first and foremost, set an honest example. And I say that because we'll have American delegations or Western delegations come into Libya and say, well, where are the female peacemakers? And there'll be 5 men in suits. So let's set an honest example. Let's say, okay, well, we're against, corruption, then we're against all corruption. We support women in government, or we support women economically, then let's genuinely support women economically. Let's not give $20,000 to a male who wants a grant and $1,300 to the women and tell her, well, you didn't really make much of that opportunity. That's not fair and it's not realistic. And that's something that granting agencies here can actually be very beneficial in. Microfinancing women for economic opportunity is not working for a reason. In most of our countries, it doesn't work because it's not enough. They don't get the technical support, they don't get the follow-up support. A second thing is for those who do work in agencies, which then go, for example, USAID or State Department or other think tanks and organizations, and are going to Libya or to Iraq, there has to be a greater understanding of the local context. It is a personal responsibility. If you are a doctor, you need to understand how to deal with the disease you're treating. If you are going to go to a country, you have to take it on as a personal responsibility that you are going to listen to the individuals, that you are going to ask them what is wrong with the genuine belief and intent that you are going to help them in the way that they need, not in the way that you think is right. Because it tends to be that we go at different paces, right? Like in Libya, something will not happen next week. It will take us 5 or 10 years to do something. But I'm sure that if we do it our way, we can get there. But if somebody parachutes in and says, this is what you have to do, every single door will close for this generation and probably the next. So genuinely listen to the local actors who know the society, who know how they can maneuver, and who know the risks. Because what happens, and somebody at the conference called it SUV culture, which I loved. There's this SUV culture of we come in and our security matters and our opinions matter and we're here to save you and to help you. And then the local civil society actors, who everyone knows their name and they know where they live and they know their families, are at extreme risk because they're doing things which may not necessarily be in line with what is culturally, or not culturally, but what is possible and appropriate, right? At that time, in that time frame. So I think we just have to be realistic of local actors and of kind of the timeline that they set. So.
Thank you. And it's important to remember that even as we talk about 1 or 2 drivers of violent extremism and conflict, that it's complex and there are multiple drivers of conflict, multiple drivers of extremism, political, economic, psychological, ideological, and that similarly our solutions and strategies have to take into account all these multiple drivers and to engage them as much as possible strategically and in mutually reinforcing ways. So I want to open it up for question and answer. If you could just give your name and your organizational affiliation and keep it brief so that we can get to as many people as possible. Microphone handlers, I know the woman back there was fast.
Sorry, can we just give a quick shout out to our night? Oh, okay. Well, you can talk to them after.
Hi, I'm Leslie Cosgrove. Today I'm with Womankind International and my own firm. I have a million questions for every single one of you. But the one I am fascinated with the most, Fatima, is how did you get young men to want to hear what you had to say when the leadership of men was telling them something totally different? How did you break that barrier?
بصراحة هنالك مبادرات سلام أنا قمت بها وحدي. مثلا أذكر لك مثال، كانت عندنا أزمة جدا كبيرة بعدم وجود الكهرباء في محافظة البصرة.
Frankly speaking, there were many peace initiatives has been conducted by me alone. For example, we have a big crisis about the power supply in Basra.
وكان الجو جدا حار، وصلت درجة الحرارة أكثر من 50 وكان شهر رمضان.
The weather was very hot and it was summer, and the temperature degree is exceeded or reached 50 Celsius degree, and it was a Ramadan. It means the fasting holy months in Islam.
فكانت الكهرباء تستمر أكثر من 20 ساعة مقطوعة عندنا.
So the power off it was continue more than 20 hours daily.
فأنا بدأت كتبت ورقة كبيرة ووقفت أمام مبنى مجلس المحافظة وقلت لابد أن تتحسن الكهرباء في البصرة.
So I wrote on a paper a big sentence saying that the electricity needs to be improved in Basra, and I took it and stand before the provincial council in Basra.
بعض المرة كانت في السيارات والناس التي تمر كانوا يتصورونني مثلا مجنونة أنني أعمل هذا الشيء لأنني واقفة بمفردي.
So some passersby and some people were looking at me. They thought I am crazy because I'm doing that alone.
اليوم الثاني عندما وقفت وجدت تقريبا أكثر من 10 أشخاص معي يرفعون نفس الشيء.
At the very next day, I found about 10 persons raising the same banner, standing with me before the provincial council.
اليوم الثالث 50.
At the third day, they turned to be 50 guys.
10 أيام أصبح عددنا 1050.
Within 10 days, we are turned about
1050
more 1,050 persons.
فوجئت كل القنوات الفضائية تأتي معنا.
Then I have been surprised that most of the satellite channels making coverage for this incident.
وكنت أسألهم لماذا أتوا فقالوا ما تعملينه هو من أجل المجتمع.
So I asked why you are keep gathering around me. So they told me because what you are doing is for the society.
نعم، مثال آخر أحكي لك، فهذه بعض المبادرات التي نعملها هي تجعل المجتمع يقتنع بها. ربما في البدء أنا أكون وحدي وأشعر بالخوف، لكنني فيما بعد أصر على عملي حتى أجد من يضمنه.
So this is one of the peace initiative that we are conducted alone, and then we found interaction by the society and they are gathering around us.
وأيضا مبادرة أخرى أنني هؤلاء الشباب الميليشيا عندما جمعتهم وذهبنا نظفنا المستشفيات في حالة كانت البصرة تعاني من عدم وجود نظافة وعدم وجود، أنهم فرحوا كثيرا عندما رأوا أنهم ساعدوا المرضى برفع نفاياتهم، ساعدوا المرضى بالجلوس قربهم، هم شعروا أنهم يعملون عمل إنساني ليس برفع السلاح.
So for the militiamen, they were so happy when we go to the hospital and they clean it up from the dirt around it. So they felt that they do something good for the society.
وأيضا كمثال آخر لا أريد أن أطيل في الحديث، دخلنا إلى مدرسة لا يوجد فيها شبابيك ولا أبواب والأطفال كانوا يجلسون والجو بارد، فقلت لهم لا تتصوروا ابن المالكي أو ابن أسامة النجيفي موجود بالمدرسة حتى يهتموا بها، هذه مدرسة أولادنا.
So another example, we conducted a field visit to a primary school, and it was there were many students there, and the windows were out of glasses, and they were freezing there. So I told those militiamen around me, do not imagine they're going to be improved or any kind of revenge will be conducted to this school, because there is no Al-Maliki son here or neither Osama Najafi son here. So no one will take care of them.
فكان هنالك صندوق صغير، كان الكثير من الشباب الميليشيا الذين أنا متواصلة معهم، هنالك من المتبرع مبلغ $2 وبالمبلغ يصبح أكثر من $2000.
So many of the militiamen who was already I am in contact with them. We have a small box for donation, and some people donate with $1, and we were able to gather about $2,000 and fix the windows.
أنا فوجئت عندما أصلحنا الزجاج وأصلحنا المراوح والكهربائيات، الكل كان فرح، الكل كان مسرور، الكل وضع على صفحتي بالفيسبوك ماذا عمل من عمل إنساني.
Everyone who participated in this action was really happy when we fixed the windows, when we fixed the fans, some electric issue in the schools. They were so happy, and they put these pictures on their Facebook pages.
بصراحة أمثلة كثيرة، لكنني الوقت لا يسعنا أن نتحدث بالكثير الذي عملناه، لكن قلت لك هو عندما نعمل عمل إنساني ودائما نستخدم معهم الأحاديث النبوية، الأقوال التي قالها مثلا الله سبحانه وتعالى، فنجد استقبال جدا كثير عندما نستخدم هذا الفكر الديني نحو الإنسان.
Actually, we have multiple examples when we do such humanitarian actions, and we used to talk, when we talk to them, we use the prophet speech, God speech. So she refers that she used the same style through religion, but in the most productive and for the good betterment for the society.
وخاصة آية قرآنية جدا مؤثرة، وتعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تتعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان.
So there are a well-known verse from Quran. It's called that we have to cooperate for the good and everyone betterment, and not and not on the opposite way, which is aggressor way and bad way.
فهم يجدون هذا ليس قولي، الله يطلب هذا.
So they found it is not my saying or it is not my desire, but this is what God says.
وبعض الأحيان أعتذر أنا على الإطالة، لكن أذكر لك مثال عندما كانت الأحداث الطائفية بالعراق وهدمت الجوامع بين المذهبين الشيعي والسني، كانت مأساة جدا كبيرة، قتل الكثير فيها بسبب هذه الظاهرة، في سبب كنيسة هدمت حدثت خلاف، في سبب جامع حدث خلاف بين الطرفين وذهب ضحاياها الكثير.
And sorry for taking a long time, but believe me, after the collapse, many issues such the demolition of a church or a mosque belong to Sunni or Shia, it leads to a lot of killing and violence between people.
فأنا كنت أدخل إلى المدارس وإلى الجامعات وكنت أقول لهم الكنيسة عندما تهدم تبنى، نحن نبنيها والجامع يبنى، لكن الإنسان عندما يقتل من الذي يعيده للحياة.
So I used to make a field visit to the school, and I frankly speak telling them when the church demolished or a mosque, it could be rebuilt, it's easy, but when the human killed, who can return him back to life?
فالكنيسة ليس مقدسة ولا الجامع المقدس.
So the mosque or the church are not sacred.
القدسية لله.
The holiness and sacred is only for God.
وتهان هذه القدسية بقتل الإنسان.
And this scary issue insulted by killing the human.
فالإنسان له الكرامة وعلينا أن نحافظ عليها.
So the human has the dignity and we have to keep it and to preserve it for him.
وأختصرها بآية قرآنية، الله سبحانه وتعالى يقول من أحيا نفسا كأنما أحيا الناس جميعا.
And I finish my speech with a verse from Quran. God says, who revive or who preserve a human life as he preserved the entire human life.
لم يحدد النفس لا مسلم ولا مسيحي ولا يهودي، وإنما قال نفس إنسانية.
And God didn't specify which soul that you have to save or preserve. It is just a human life. It's not a Christian or Muslim. Any
شكرا
human.
لكم وأعتذر على إطالة.
Thank you and sorry for taking a long time.
Why don't we do a game of ping pong and get a few questions, a couple from each side, and then we can invite our speakers to respond to the questions en group, en masse. And I should also let you know that our visitors have to leave immediately at 3 o'clock, and so unfortunately we're going to have to stop immediately at 3 and then give them space so they can run out here and get over to the other side of the mall for some meetings. So can we get a question from over here, and then Melissa can...
Hi, my name is Celine Nielsen. I'm originally from Turkey, and I've lived in the United States for 27 years. 2 years ago, I went to Southeast Turkey to teach at a university when the situation broke with Syria, and hundreds and thousands of refugees were coming over the border. And I made a lot of friends and went to visit the refugee camps and talked to a lot of people. And there was just two things that I've noticed. It was that what was happening was there was this Free Syrian Army that was formed against Assad. It was somewhat united. It wasn't divided up into, IS and all those different units right now. And what I noticed when I talked to people were people had this sense of belonging, brought them together against this cause. And Alaa and Mubin also talked about this. And I felt that it was very strong, this sense of belonging, need for sense of belonging. It's almost like, if you lose a child and you go to a grief group where there are other people like you just have this solid connection that you wouldn't make with anyone else. And so I noticed that was one of the driving forces of people getting together and doing things. And another was that I noticed was the media, the images and the pictures and the things that they have shown me. I just, you can't help but be enraged and feel that anger and identify. So what I'm going to ask you, I guess it's for everybody, but especially for Mubin, is that you felt that sense of belonging and then wanted to be together, and then you left. So was it another sense of belonging? Did you feel like you wanted to belong to another group that was really big and powerful, that wanted to leave, that wanted you to leave the first one? I mean, I think it's one of the things that begs the question of, would it help to have to create this, to create a group with a sense of belonging that we can give to people?
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
Sorry, I have a question to Sheikh. I'm Mohammed Mansour, journalist from Egypt. First, I have the question, two questions. First, I wanted to know about your background. Are you, like, when you were involved in extremism or whatever you call it, you were graduate of religious school, madrasa, Islamic school, or what was your background? I noticed that most of leaders, like Ayman al-Zawahiri, for example, he's a graduate of medical school. Bin Laden was a businessman, and most of them, they are not grow up in religious schools to know the religion. Second, I have a comment about the word Khawarij. For me, it doesn't make sense without explaining what it means. Khawarij, it means the people who went out. This is the meaning in Arabic. And these people were supporting Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then they rejected him, and later on they adopted radical ideology. But does it make sense to, when you call ISIS or Daesh or Islamic State, when you call them Khawarij, what is the comparison here? And in my opinion, for example, ISIS, when they set fire on Al-Kasaspa, they based their action on fatwa. And the fatwa has, they said that Abu Bakr, he set fire on somebody, and there are also fatwa from Ibn Taymiyyah, who's most of Muslims refers to, said about this fatwa about setting fire on somebody who was invading. But I didn't find any religious institution refuting the fatwa, or and this fatwa, or Ibn Taymiyyah is a great scholar, and it's Wahhabi school in Saudi Arabia, who are great supporters of him. So instead of refuting the fatwa, you say Khawarij without explaining it. So
Thank you. Is there one more question, brief question we can take?
Hi, my name is Isabel Darling, and I work at International Institute of New England, and I do refugee resettlement work here in the States. And something that I notice is that we have a lot of dynamic leaders that are coming into this country without an opportunity to sit at a table, to have their voices heard, and they're straddling both cultures and both worlds. And I'm curious how I can be that bridge and gatekeeper to invite them to a table, to be leaders, to speak on behalf of their communities, and potentially want to go back home to be a leader to prevent refugees from having to come here again.
I'll try to keep it brief. Sense of belonging, sense of purpose, really that's what it comes down to. I think what happened to me was I had a sense of purpose. I didn't know how I was supposed to manifest that and what should I do with that. So the answer is that we need to create narratives for young people, especially men and women, boys and girls, so that they can apply themselves in something positive. And this is what Fatima has done very successfully. And I think society building things, people get that. They see that. They see the roads are cleaner. They see the windows are up. The roofs are over the things. So that's whatever. And just a little bit of a joke, snark comment. You talked about, that I want to join a bigger group. And I did join the bigger gang, the government. What was your background? Was it religious? It wasn't. I grew up in a stereotypical madrasa system where a wooden bench, Indo-Pakistani Maulana, who didn't even pronounce the Arabic properly. We learned how to recite the Arabic. We didn't learn the meaning of the Arabic. Didn't know anything what I was saying. I could recite it very nice. My makhraj is perfect, but I didn't know what I was saying. Like you said, most of these people, they don't really come from a religious background. Anwar Aulaki, everyone talks about him. Da, da, da. What was his PhD in? Human resource management. And to your point about Khawarij, basically I wrote, what's the point of using it? Because they really don't like it when we use it. That's really I'm thinking of this in the counter-messaging side. You know, what can you use that makes the Muslims feel good about you using it and makes the adversary feel bad about you using it. So that's really the reason why I use it. And you're right, I can go into explanations, the history of it. There's a long history of it. If you go to my Twitter thing, on my pics section, my pictures, I have screen grabs of statements from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, of other religious scholars who talk about who the Khawarij are and how bad they are, basically. And that's why I do that, so that when you point them to it, when you see the Prophet ﷺ saying they are the dogs of hell, they are the worst creatures. Blessedness is for those who are killed by them and who kill them. So that's why I use it. And about the burning fatwa, you're right. Ibn Taymiyyah gave out a fatwa. This was in the time of the Mongol invasion of Baghdad, when they burned books, killed everyone. So I think, in that context, he came up with this fatwa. But Ibn Taymiyyah was, somewhat of a black sheep. The rest of the scholars in his age actually imprisoned him because of some of his views. So I don't take from his fatwas that much. But of course, like you said, Wahhabi types, they do take from his fatwas, largely because they're very aggressive and violent and attack the other person, but ignoring that it came in the time of the Mongol invasion. So I would have liked to go on more about the Khawarij, but you can always look it up, of course, but see the pic section, it'll give you the scriptural references of the Khawarij. Thanks.
One thing I'd like to throw in here is that we had Sheikh Abdallah bin Baya here for a speech a few months ago, and he actually spoke specifically about one of the fatwas of Ibn Taymiyyah, and he said that there was a misunderstanding in the translation of one of these fatwas, and that if you actually go back and look at the original text of the fatwa, it's been misinterpreted and misunderstood throughout history. And so he issued a fatwa and a clarification of one of these fatwas that seem to support violence.
Ibn Taymiyyah has a fatwa against the Khawarij. It's you can see it on my pic section. Use it.
Just a voice of caution in a sense. I come from a context where, for us, the religious framework has been problematic. And one of the things that we've seen is that, and I've heard sort of very senior people say this, is that when you put all your morality and ethics and so forth under the rubric of a religion, you practice, you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't whatever, because you're a Christian, because you're a Muslim, because you're, if you give up that religious, if you stop believing for whatever reason, all those values also go away as well. And that's something that we see in some of these places, that there's a sort of separation of the core values. And I think that for many of us, the issue of looking at the totality of everything, whether it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is very universal and is very much rooted in all of our cultures and histories and traditions and so forth, or whether it's other frameworks for ethics and morals and so forth. I think we shouldn't be doing an or. It's not religion or. It really is both. And frankly, we have a saying, and we have a piece of poetry in Persian where Moses comes and tells a farmer, why are you behaving like that? Why are you talking about God, as if he's a human being? And God tells Moses off by saying, we don't care about the external behavior. We care about internally how this person is, and we care about the outcomes. So it doesn't matter what the input is. If somebody says they're a good Christian and they're out there killing people, I'm not sure how good they are, right? So it's really about the impact and the outcomes in terms of the behavior, and we need to recognize that other factors come into play in terms of how we practice, being decent to the rest of the world. In our work, we're trying to look back at not only the religious factors, but cultural figures, historic figures, folkloric figures that re-emphasize the idea of, for example, women's leadership and wisdom, so that we can say this is part of my own history and culture, and we have plenty of that in most of our contexts. On the refugee question, I really relate to that. I was, I saw Iranians who came with doctors, engineers, and so forth, and they were, as a refugee, your entire identity is thrown out, and it's absurd. And even in this country specifically, you have the best of everybody here, right, who could be advising the government on what and we have that notion of what you want for America and what you want for your own country, for your country of birth. And yet there's a tendency to exclude those voices. And it's absurd. I look at the Iran sanctions issue right now. The vast majority of Iranian Americans are like, this is absurd. And yet there's a tiny minority that is funded by a particular subgroup of neoconservatives that have the voice of Congress, and they're influencing. And it's bad for Iran, and it's bad for the US, and frankly, it's bad for the world. So I think we really need to revisit that. And it's kind of why I do my work here anyway. Thank you.
Just really quickly, a follow-up to how you ensure that they're at the table. I think first and foremost, you have to inspire in them a desire to be at the table still, because a lot of them feel like they can't contribute, because a lot of them, as she said, you have people who have PhDs and medical doctorates, and they can't work in this country. They can't provide for their family, and so it becomes a very big issue of self-dignity and respect. So I think that really understanding immigrants are coming, at times from fine situations, at times from very difficult situations, but creating a place in which they are not Libyan or Canadian or Iranian or British, right? Where they are both and they can be both and comfortably, I think is important.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask Karin Ryan if she has anything, final word that she wants to say as we're ending the session.
Hi, Ella and Paul. Good to see you all, friends from our Carter Center world. So just the last thought I wanted to say is that we're going to keep this conversation going. Next week there's a summit at the White House. And as we're thinking about what's happening in this town this week, discussion about the authorization of the use of military force, we're going to be putting out some thoughts based on what you've heard. I urge you to keep an eye out for that, and also come back to our website, the Forum on Women, Religion, Violence, and Power, to stay in touch and to see our publications, et cetera. I really hope to grow this engagement, but I just really want to thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, and one final point I want to make, reiterating something that Manal had said at the beginning, which is that we spoke a lot today about Islam. A lot of our participants were coming from Muslim majority contexts, but that this issue of religion and religious ideas, religious extremism or violent extremism that's being framed in religious terms, this isn't just a situation that's happening in Muslim majority countries. And with Islam, I work a lot in Asia, in Sri Lanka, in Burma, and elsewhere, and we're seeing the rise of extremism within Buddhist frames there. We see Christian extremism, especially on the rise in certain countries in Africa and in the US and elsewhere. And there seems to be this way in which they're fueling each other. And so just as we're talking about the need for there to be religious counter messages or religious actors involved in addressing some of the underlying drivers of conflict within Islam, these same issues are relevant across different traditions. And if we're only focusing on Islam, that also, I think, fuels some of this narrative around the world that this issue is about Islam, or this is the West against Islam. So I just want to add that cautionary piece at the end, especially coming from the Religion and Peace Building program, where we try to work across religious traditions and acknowledge the drivers across religious traditions. Sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all of your questions. As I said, they got to run off to another meeting, but we thank you so much for coming out here. I know it's a schlep to get down to the U.S. Institute of Peace, but we love having you here. So thank you very much.